In 1933, experts called it the bridge that couldn't be built. A mile of treacherous water, 372 feet deep, with currents so violent they could swallow a destroyer. But the real nightmare wasn't the water, it was how they built it. No power cranes, no computer models, no hydraulic pumps, just human grit, hand tools, and a terrifying amount of explosives. This is the dark truth of how they conquered the Golden Gate. Joseph Strauss was a man possessed. He carried blueprints in his briefcase for years, pitching a bridge that everyone, including the US Navy, called a foolhardy dream. The strait was a graveyard of fog and 6-knot currents. Twice a day, the tides tore through like a runaway train. To build here, they didn't just need steel, they needed to invent a new way to survive. We take power tools for granted, but in 1937, everything was manual. Before the first piece of steel rose, a quiet mathematician named Charles Ellis spent years at a desk. Every bolt, every beam, and every ounce of tension was calculated by hand. Think about that. 83,000 tons of steel held together by math done with a pencil and paper. If he was off by an inch, the whole thing would snap like a twig in the Pacific wind. They started by building a path into the ocean, a timber trestle 1,100 feet long. But the Pacific fought back. In 1933, a freighter emerged from the fog and smashed 400 feet of it into splinters. When they rebuilt it, nature sent a gale that wrecked 800 feet more. The men didn't quit. They went back into the freezing spray, driving piles into the seabed with hand winches and raw muscle. To anchor the towers, they had to reach bedrock. There were no automated drills. Instead, divers dropped pilot bombs by hand into narrow shafts. Imagine being underwater in total darkness with the tide pulling at your suit, arming explosives by touch. Once the rock was leveled, they poured concrete, not with pumps, but with hand-shoveled buckets and gravity chutes. Every yard of that foundation was a victory of human sweat over the elements. Then came the cables. Each main cable is 3 feet thick, made of 27,572 individual wires. There was no way to ship a cable that big, so they spun them in the air. Small carriages ran back and forth like clockwork. In a single shift, they spun 1,000 miles of wire. If a single wire was tangled or kinked, the whole line stopped. Men stood on narrow catwalks 700 feet up, checking the tension by eye and hand, while the wind whipped at 45 miles per hour.
Before the wire could move, the men had to build the catwalks. These were narrow, swaying wooden walkways slung between the towers. There were no guardrails, just a wire rope to hold onto. On foggy mornings, the wood would become slick with condensation. One worker described it as walking on a wet tightrope for 8 hours a day. They used hand wrenches to bolt the mesh flooring, knowing that if a bolt dropped, it would disappear into the fog for 5 seconds before hitting the water. If they dropped, they followed the bolt. The mechanical heart, the spinning carriage. The power tool of 1937 was a simple 5-foot wheel called a spinning carriage. It was pulled by a steam-powered winch, but the brain was the man standing at the tower's edge. As the wheel raced across at 600 feet per minute, it carried loops of wire. The workers, known as wire rats, had to catch the wire as it passed and lay it into a saddle, a massive steel groove at the top of the tower. This had to be done with perfect timing. If the wire was too loose, it would sag and tangle. If it was too tight, it could snap under the tension, whipping across the catwalk like a steel blade. There were no sensors to check tension. The wire rats checked it by feel and by using handheld plumb bobs and chalk marks. The most dangerous job was at the center of the bridge. This was the transfer station. Two carriages coming from opposite shores would meet in the middle. The men here had to manually swap the wire loops between the wheels. Imagine standing on a platform that is swaying 10 to 15 feet in the wind, 700 feet in the air, while two heavy steel wheels race toward you. You have seconds to unhook the tensioned wire and rehook it to the next carriage. One mistake in the handoff wouldn't just stop the line, it could send the heavy wheel jumping off its track, crushing anyone in its path. Once the 27,000 wires were laid, they were just a loose, messy bundle of spaghetti. This is where the dark truth of the manual labor really hits. To turn that bundle into a solid 3-foot-thick cable, they used compaction yokes. These were heavy steel rings with manual jacks. Teams of 4 men would stand on the cable itself. They didn't have hydraulic presses. They used 4-foot-long cheater bars on the jacks to get more leverage. They would heave in unison. 1, 2, 3, push, cranking the jacks by hand until the steel bundle screamed under the pressure. They did this every 3 feet for over 4,000 feet of cable. The physical toll was brutal. The vibration from the ratcheting and the constant tension caused white finger and permanent nerve damage in the workers' hands. But they couldn't stop. If the cable wasn't compacted perfectly, moisture would seep in and the bridge would rot from the inside out before it even opened. By the time the spinning reached its peak, the crews were moving 1,000 miles of wire a day. They were working 24 hours a day in shifts. At night, they worked under dim, incandescent bulbs that flickered in the wind. The dark truth is that the higher they went, the more the wind became a physical enemy. It wasn't just the cold, it was the noise. The wind whistling through thousands of tensioned wires created a high-pitched shriek that drove men to the brink of madness. They had to communicate using hand signals because the song of the bridge was louder than a jet engine. This was the era of the Great Depression. These men weren't just workers, they were survivors. They endured the sky-high weaving because the only thing scarier than falling 700 feet was going back to a breadline.
This is the dark truth of the Golden Gate.